we are up to fundamentally discussing reincarnation, which we've sort of mentioned here and there, throughout many of our discussions, but now we really want to focus on it because we're at this point of saying, all right, the person passes away, they got judged, they went through the preliminary softer cleansings, chibut hakever, kaf hakala, and now possibly they're going to go to Gehenna and have reincarnation, possibly only Gehenna, possibly only reincarnation. Of course, possibly they're going to go straight to Gan Eden without a need for any of this. So we spent a while discussing Gehenna, and now we're going to discuss reincarnation. We are all reincarnations. All of us. This is a generation that's a reincarnation of several other generations, as I think we mentioned last week. As a generation, we were all here by building the Tower of Babylonia, of Babel. We were all part of the generation that were enslaved in Egypt and got out. We were all part of the generation of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. We all came back to be the generation that brings redemption. So that's one way. Well, of course we know we've been here before. We already know 3 other lifetimes. Also, in 1745, when the first leader of Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, was about to be born, the day he was being born, the 18th of Elul of 1745, the Baal Shem Tov, who was the leader of world Jewry at the time, the Baal Shem Tov was very, very elated. He was in a very, very, very joyous mood. And his students asked him, I'm sure in an appropriate way, what's going on? And he said, a new soul is entering this world, a soul that's never been here before. And that was a soul of the Alter Rebbe, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who was born that day. And he was so excited, ecstatic. This was such a special thing, a new soul coming in 1745. So that's a few hundred years ago. And even then, in the mid-1700s, new souls, everybody's been here many times. So for sure, we look at ourselves, we look at our generation, we're like, we've been here many times. And that's actually an advantage, as we will discuss once we finish going through why do we have reincarnations. So there's some more rare situations and then more normative. One situation which would be more rare is that your soul was sent back down because the world needs you. And of course, that's what we said is true generationally about all of us, because we are the generation that brought redemption, and therefore we know how to bring redemption, and therefore we're coming back to bring redemption. But in terms of the specifics of individuals, that's more rare, and that's usually like a tzaddik, a very great holy spiritual person. We're told, for example, King David, and Rachel, David HaMelech and Rachel Imenu shared the same soul. So it's not that Rachel did something wrong and therefore had to come back down again and was David. No, one of the greatest souls of all times. Her soul needed to come back down to be David. Adam HaRishon and Yaakov Avinu. Adam and Jacob. Again, Adam HaRishon was the second greatest soul of all times. I know people don't always realize that. He has sort of a bad rap, as I would call it. People misunderstand his greatness. He was literally the second greatest soul of all times. The greatest soul is Mashiach, and the second greatest soul is Adam. So it's not that he did something wrong and came back as Yaakov. It's that this soul energy had to come back again as Yaakov. Of course, a famous one that many people know is Pinchas and Eliyahu Hanavi. Pinchas in the Torah, the zealot in the Torah, the one that went with self-sacrifice to kill Cozbi and Zimri. That soul came back to be Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi. Moshe was a reincarnation of Noach. Also, it says another reincarnation with Moshe, so I guess he comprised more than one soul. It says this Cain and Hevel came back down as Korach and Moshe. So that's, again, maybe we don't always know. It's rare that we know. So we only know if it's written in a holy book somewhere. In more modern times, not so modern, but jumping from these biblical times, the youngest son of the 4th Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was a very holy child and who passed away at a young age. The day he passed away, he knew, he was a very holy child. And he said, he's so happy. He's going back to his grandfather's today. He asked his parents to be dressed in Shabbos clothing. And he was dressed in Shabbos clothing and lying on the bed, and all of the brothers of the Reb Maharash, who were all tzaddikim, they're all around his bed as his holy, holy soul passed away. And of course, after this happened, his parents, the Reb Maharash and his wife, Rebbe Rivka, were very broken, very special child, and he passed away at a very young age, child. And the Rebbe Maharash's father, who was a Tzemach Tzedek, who was the Rebbe at that time, the leader of world Jewry at that time, in a very obvious way, he said to them, you should know your son that just passed away, he was a reincarnation of the soul of the Alter Rebbe, of the first leader of Chabad. And his soul needed to come back into this world for a few years to help the world. And you merited that he came to be your son. Not that the Alter Rebbe had done something wrong and therefore needs to come back down for a few years as his child, but rather that the world needed that energy one more time, soul embodied. Generationally, as we said, we are a reincarnation of the generation that experienced the exodus from Egypt. We experienced the enslavement in Egypt. We experienced the exodus from Egypt. We experienced the desert. The generation that left Egypt is the generation that will bring redemption because we know how to do it. We did it before. We're going to do it again. We're going to bring redemption. So that means as a generation, maybe one of our souls had nothing else of the stuff we're going to talk about, nothing wrong that had to be rectified. Still, every soul of the generation came back because this is a generation that created redemption. This is a generation that will create redemption again. And specifically, we're talking about the women of the generation, because the women in Egypt were the ones who created redemption for the women and men and children. Those same women, us, will be the women who will create redemption now. So specifically, the women of Egypt, the Arizal says, will be reincarnated to be the women of this generation to create redemption again. That is one reason why a soul will come back again. Another reason could sort of combine two issues. On one hand, the world needs you. At the same time, you didn't do everything you needed to do in the world. So when we're saying the world needs you, obviously it means it's a holy soul. So when we say you didn't do everything you needed to do, we don't mean you did wrong, chas v'shalom. We don't mean you were transgressing, because that wouldn't jive with this concept. But rather, the people that are very great people, but maybe they didn't do everything they needed to do. And that's why they have to come back again. At the same time, though, the world needs them, which is how we know these are very holy, godly souls. Famous example of that is with the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was a Gilgul. He was not a new soul. The Baal Shem Tov did not want to reveal himself. The Baal Shem Tov was a hidden tzaddik for his entire life. And the Baal Shem Tov reached the age of 36. And Achia Shiloni said, okay, now is the time you're supposed to reveal yourself to the world. And the Baal Shem Tov didn't want to do that. He didn't want anybody to know of his greatness. It was just for God. And Achia Shiloni said, no, you got to reveal yourself. But he really didn't want to. Sorry, Aliza, I see your hand's been raised. I'm sort of in the middle of this, but I don't want to. Okay, it's long. So yes, Aliza.
When we're looking at, let's say, Adam becoming, Rachel becoming David.
Mm-hmm.
So if Adam put aside 70 years of his life to give to David, who lived to 70, then where did the years come from for Rachel?
In her manifestation as Rachel, or her manifestation as David?
Her manifestation as the soul's manifestation as Rachel.
That was a separate lifetime. That wasn't a problem. It was David that it says that there was a kitrug, there was a prosecution against his soul entering the world, because of course the forces of evil understood this is a soul that's a harbinger of the redemption, and therefore all the forces of evil tried to block this soul from being born, which is why it was supposed to be that the soul would be a stillborn. So it wasn't Rachel that was the harbinger of redemption in that fashion, that all the forces of evil were trying to block from entering this world. It was David specifically.
So then when there's a reincarnation, one lifetime and lifespan has nothing to do with the other
lifespan? No, nothing to do with it.
Thank you so much for clarifying. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. I thought maybe it was a question on what I was saying, so that might have distracted everyone. And I was like, oh, I should just finish the story. And then I'm like, well, she's raising her hand. It's a long story. Okay. Sorry. So to get back, my mistake. I should have asked Elisa her question now. My mistake. But again, we're saying that the Baal Shem Tov did not want to reveal himself. He did not want his name to be known in the world. He did not want to have fame and glory and recognition and be considered the leader of the Jewish people on any level. But he was told he had to. So at that time, the spiritual leader his name was Reb Adam Baal Shem. Baal Shem means master of the holy name, master of God's name, meaning people that could use the names of God and really bring down miracles. So when we say the Baal Shem Tov, when the world today would say the Baal Shem Tov, the master of God's name, they really mean the fourth Baal Shem, whose name actually was Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. But he was the fourth. There was Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem, then Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem, and then Rabbi Adam Baal Shem, and then who we call the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem. The commonality of all of them is that they were all more or less hidden, meaning many people in the world didn't know who they were. Well, I mean, it's not true exactly, because at certain points they did reveal themselves, but for long stretches of their life they were hidden. And then like later in their life they would reveal themselves and have many students and teach. And all of them organized like disciples, schools, so to speak, groups of hidden tzaddikim who go around the Jewish world at that time and lift up the Jews, lift them up spiritually, lift them up physically, be kind to them, encourage them. It was a very, very hard time those years. It was after the massacres of Chmielnicki, what we call the Gezeros Tach V'Tat. It was a very hard time. The Jewish communities were just decimated. It was just a really hard time physically, which meant therefore also a really hard time spiritually. It was a really, really, really hard time for the Jewish people. So getting back to my story, I'm distracted here. So the Baal Shem didn't want to reveal himself. And the leader at that time, his name was Rabbi Adam Baal Shem, the Baal Shem before Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem. And he was like, I have to convince him to reveal himself. But for whatever spiritual reason, he knew he was not allowed to physically meet him. So Rabbi Adam wrote a long letter to him, gave it to his son, told his son where to go. His son basically just left the letter, I don't know, like on a rock somewhere in the vicinity where Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem was. And of course, God rules the world, and Rabbi Yisrael found the letter, read it, and it convinced him, and he revealed himself. What did Rabbi Adam write in that letter? Rabbi Adam wrote, I'm saying in my own words, basically, you know you're supposed to reveal yourself. You don't want to. Let me tell you something about yourself. You are a reincarnation. You lived previously as a Jew in Tzfat, the holy city of Tzfat. And you were a very simple Jew, a very pure, simple Jew. And one day, Eliyahu Navi came to your door. It was night. Your children were hungry. The house was cold and dark. And suddenly Eliyahu Navi comes. And with him comes light. With him comes warmth. The children wake up. They see it's light. It's warm. They forget they're hungry. They start dancing. And Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet, says to you, I have been sent from heaven to teach you the secrets of Torah because you were completely ignorant. But a pure, good person, but didn't know anything in terms of Torah study. I've been sent from heaven to teach you Torah. Wow, this is amazing. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Because of what you did on your bar mitzvah. What you did on your bar mitzvah was so special, it was decreed from heaven that Eliyahu Navi himself is going to come and teach you Torah. So tell me, what did you do on your bar mitzvah? And this simple Jew said, I'm not going to say. What I did was only for God. I don't want to talk about it. So Eliyahu said, well, if you don't tell me, I'm going to leave. And I won't teach you Torah. And this simple man said, what I did was for God. I'm not going to tell you. And Eliyahu left. And the house got cold, and the house got dark, and the children remembered they were hungry, and it wasn't a happy scene. And in heaven, there was a big fuss going on. Here's a man who refused to learn from Eliyahu Navi because he didn't want to share. He didn't want to talk about the good he had done. Wow, he really deserves to learn from Eliyahu Navi. So Eliyahu Navi came back. And he taught him Torah. And he learned more Torah and more Torah and more Torah with Eliyahu Navi as his personal teacher. And he became a great, great tzaddik, very learned, a tremendous mystic. And no one in the world knew about it. Maybe his wife. That was it. He never got honor for it. He never got money for it. He was an impoverished, seemingly simple person for his entire life. He passes away, goes to heaven. And everyone can't get over the holiness of this soul. But there's one thing that soul didn't do. That soul never revealed himself. That soul never shared his Torah with the world. And Rabbi Adam said, and that soul is you. And that's why you were sent back down. You were sent back down to do that one thing you didn't do in your previous lifetime. Reveal yourself to the world. That's what you have to do now. And Rabbi Yisrael read the letter. And on his 36th birthday, he revealed himself to the world. And he became known to all of us as the Baal Shem Tov. So that's a famous, famous, famous example of this concept of, on one hand, the world needing you. At the same time, your energy also need something. You need to do something you didn't do before, not because you transgressed, but just something you did not do before. There are many other examples, but I don't want to take too much time on this. But how do you process that concept that someone could be literally a tzaddik, as this previous incarnation of the Baal Shem Tov was completely a tzaddik, and yet he didn't do everything? How do you relate to that idea? How does that sit with you?
So if a tzaddik didn't accomplish their whole mission, then what about all of us who, as whether it's a Benoni or an outright Rasha, how are we supposed to aspire to accomplish all of our tafkid here?
So I wouldn't say that tzaddik didn't accomplish all of his mission. I don't think that's possible to say. Obviously, if he's a tzaddik, I would assume he accomplished his mission. I would think more that you could accomplish whatever's on your plate, but that doesn't mean you did everything God wants from you and needs from you. And maybe that's going to happen in another lifetime. Meaning, again, looking at this situation with the Baal Shem Tov, it's not that in his previous incarnation he was wrong by not revealing himself to the world. And there are many great tzaddikim that their whole lives are hidden. Of course, we know there's a concept of the 36 hidden tzaddikim that exist in every generation. It's not that we're saying they're wrong for being hidden. They understand the nature of their soul. They understand they're supposed to be hidden. So it's not like, oh, he didn't do his tafkid. He didn't do his job. No, it means he did his job then, but there was something he didn't do because that wasn't on his job description then. But he has to come back down because now it is. Because now his soul needs the completion of that as well. Almost like for all of us, we have situations, we're told that we are the final generation. Mashiach's coming. Thank God. We definitely need it. And therefore, we're told that we should look at everything that we currently encounter and understand this is all that's left from all of our lifetimes of work. Let me try to say that again because I don't know if it was clear, but it's a very powerful point to understand when you look at yourself in the mirror. We've all been here many times, as we said. Over those many times, I'm sure we all did many, many great things. We're all back. Now we know, as we explained, we have this overarching mission to bring redemption. We're the souls that brought redemption in Egypt. As the Arizal says, we're going to bring redemption now. But on a personal level, it's possible for each one of us that maybe there's something my soul never accomplished. It's possible. Maybe not. And I'm only here because I know how to bring redemption and I'm doing it for the world. And that's possible too. But it's sort of more probable that there's some things my soul didn't accomplish. And that's also why I'm here, to finish off the last jobs that I never did in all of my previous lifetimes. Well, how do I know what that is? How frustrating. Imagine that, I'm going to spend a whole lifetime trying to be a good person, and I don't happen to do those things, which is why my soul is here. So, of course, one answer that we know is what you are challenged with, what's difficult for you, is why your soul is here. And therefore, all the things that really, are so hard for you, that's probably the last things that you haven't done in all your myriad of lifetimes. So focus on the things that are really hard for you because that's why they're so hard for you, because that's why you're here, personally. Another layer of answer to this, which isn't a conflict, but they're both true, is whatever is currently on your plate, whatever are the situations you are dealing with, God is orchestrating that because these are the situations you never did so far. These are the ways you never served him yet. And that's why he's sending you those situations. But all the other things that you're not dealing with that don't occur in your reality, you know why? It's because you already achieved them in your previous lifetimes. You don't have to focus on them now. You took care of them. But what you encounter, your challenges, your situations, your job description, what you deal with, probably those are the things in all your lifetimes you never yet accomplished. And that's why you have to deal with it now. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on this? Okay, so another idea, which is might be considered sort of similar to this previous concept of there's something your soul needs to do, but it's a little more getting into the realm of maybe you didn't do everything you were supposed to do. Meaning previously when we were talking about the Baal Shem Tov and other examples along those lines, very holy, great people. And I said, when Elisa said, oh, they didn't finish their tafkid, I said, no, we don't look at it like that. Holy, great people, But still, another concept is someone who actually didn't finish the job that we have to do, that all of us have an obligation to do, which is every one of the 613 commandments. So that does not fall in the same category as what I was saying previously. We have no question that these great tzaddikim fulfilled all the 613 commandments, which you either fulfill by doing them or fulfill by learning about them. Meaning, obviously, many commandments are not relevant today. We can't do truma today, and if we're not a priest, we can't do any of the laws of a priest, and if we're not a king, we can't do any of the commandments of a king, and if we're not, obviously, but anything we don't fulfill by doing, we can fulfill by learning. So any person who did not do and or learn all of the 613 commandments has to come back down and again and again and again until they complete all 613 commandments. Because our soul is comprised of 613 soul powers, 613 parts. Every part needs to be oxygenated by its corresponding commandment. So if we don't fulfill or learn about every commandment, there's a part of our soul that's like withered, that's like doesn't have the oxygen it needs to function. And that's why you would have to come back again and again and again until you actually did or learned every one of the commandments. It doesn't have to all happen in one lifetime. Again, this is cumulative. So whatever you still didn't learn or do, you got to make sure you do, because this is like we're at the end of the road. So I guess maybe to help us out in this, probably for other reasons as well, I'm sure. But from our perspective, the Lubavitcher Rebbe started a concept of learning all of the commandments. He has like three tracks to learn Maimonides. Maimonides is the only codifier that actually codifies every single commandment. And he has the track of learning 3 chapters a day of Maimonides. He has a track of learning 1 chapter a day of Maimonides. He has a track of learning the commandments just in their most brief form, not the laws. And however you do it, eventually you will learn every one of the commandments, which takes care of the situation. Because if you didn't learn or do, literally the soul has to come back for that specific purpose. And then there's the most common reason why a soul comes back, which is for transgressions that need to be rectified. And if someone transgressed, of course, as we said originally, there might be the option of Gehenna. You don't have to come back for transgressions. But sometimes Gehenna would be too long, too difficult, and therefore it is actually a preferred option. And the soul sometimes is given a choice. Do you want Gehenna? Do you want a reincarnation? You have transgressions on record. Which are you choosing? Sometimes, of course, a portion of the soul is cleansed and is in Gan Eden, and another portion is sent down to Gehenna. Sent down to have a Gilgul, a reincarnation. And that idea that I mentioned before, if a person is very challenged in a certain area of serving Hashem, it's very possible that the reason why they're challenged is because for that issue they came back down into this world. Like if someone has a very hard time with being honest, good person, a religious person, they do many things right, and for some reason they have a very hard time not lying. Really challenges them. It doesn't even make sense. They're so good in so many other ways why they're so challenged by honesty, but they are. You know what? It's very possible that's why your soul came back down. Because this is what you messed up in your previous lifetime. And that's why you have to come back down to rectify it. And that's why it's so challenging to you, because whatever you have to do is what's super challenging. Sometimes when we look at that and we see things that are really challenging to us, especially if they're unusually challenging, like meaning like, why am I bothered by this when I do so many other things? Why does this drive me crazy? It could really be because this is the transgression. That is the reason my soul came back down. So therefore, I need to this time do it right. I have to do it right. Every single Jew who ever transgressed and served idols, which of course is not our current challenge, but for the entire era of the first temple, of the first Beis HaMikdash, it was a huge challenge. So any Jew who served idols had to come back down and die sanctifying God's name, as we call it, die al Kiddush Hashem, die for the sake of God, die for the sake of being a Jew. And this was how they rectified how they were corrected this huge transgression of idolatry. So for all those souls, Gehenna wouldn't have been enough. Or to cleanse it in Gehenna would have been so long and arduous and painful. Like, no. Better to come back down, to live a life, and to die. To die al Kiddush Hashem, and this will cleanse the transgression of Avodah Zarah. Which is sort of interesting because, of course, we know this because the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, said that in his time, which was quite a while ago, all such souls had already come down and died al Kiddush Hashem. So no more should souls have to come down and die al Kiddush Hashem, because already in the time of the Mittler Rebbe, that was like the 1800s, all of those souls had already rectified themselves. Well, obviously, from then till now, we have many other Jews that have come down and died al Kiddush Hashem. But I think it gives us sort of an inkling that when we see a tragedy, we don't know the backstory. We don't know the why behind the tragedy. I think of it sometimes like I'm reading just in the middle of one chapter in a book. I don't know what came before. I don't know where it's leading to. And could you imagine that when you see a person dying in this tragic way, it's actually the fulfillment of their existence? It's actually why their soul came back down to die in this fashion? So we don't know, and we're clueless, and we call it a tragedy, and that's what we're supposed to call it, and we turn to God and complain, and that's what we're supposed to do. But sometimes if we actually know the backstory, there's a lot of stuff going on that God's actually doing to help the soul. All right. I see we are out of time now. We accomplished a lot. We've got, maybe, in God willing, next week we'll finish this off and have a little more understanding on this very relevant now topic of how do we understand what's going on in the concept of reincarnation, which, by the way, some people don't even think is a Jewish concept. I've had more than once people say to me, like, do Jews believe in the afterlife? Do Jews believe in reincarnation? Do Jews believe in redemption? Like, yes. Those are actually all originally Jewish topics. They were ours, and then other people stole them. So yes, we believe in the afterlife. We believe in reincarnation. We believe in Mashiach.